Judge Marcus Hayes was a man of principle, known in his city for his fairness and calm demeanor. After a long day at the courthouse, he decided to take an evening walk. It was something he often did to clear his mind after hours of hearing cases. Tonight, the air was cool, and the streets were alive with the sounds of the bustling city. Marcus was dressed casually, a plain shirt and jeans. He didn't look like the high-ranking judge he was. He enjoyed blending in with the crowd, feeling like just another person for a while. As he walked, he decided to take a shortcut through a neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. It was an area he remembered from his childhood, but much had changed since then. The neighborhood was under heavy police patrol due to recent incidents of vandalism. Officers were on edge, watching everyone who passed by. Marcus, lost in thought, walked calmly through the area, unaware that he had caught the attention of two officers sitting in their patrol car nearby. The officers, seeing a man walking alone in a casual outfit, assumed he didn't belong there. They exchanged a glance, their suspicions already formed. One of them, Officer Grant, stepped out of the car and called out, "Hey, you there, stop where you are." Marcus turned, surprised but calm. He wasn't used to being approached like this. "Yes, officer," he asked politely, stopping in his tracks. "Where are you headed?" Grant asked sharply, walking closer. His partner, Officer Davis, joined him, both watching Marcus closely. "I'm just taking a walk," Marcus replied. "Is there a problem?" The officers exchanged another look. Grant's tone grew more impatient. "We've had reports of suspicious activity around here. Let me see your ID." Marcus reached for his wallet, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm not sure what this is about, but here's my ID," he said, handing it over. The officers barely glanced at it before their questions continued. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Davis asked, his tone accusing. "Do you live around here?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, sensing their suspicion. "I grew up near here," he said calmly. "I'm just walking through." Grant stepped closer, his expression hardening. "You're not answering my question. Why are you really here?" By now, a few people in the area had started to notice the interaction. A couple walking their dog paused at a distance, watching. Marcus, feeling the situation escalating unnecessarily, decided to stand his ground. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong. I'm simply walking through the neighborhood." "Is that a crime?" Grant's patience seemed to waver. He stepped even closer, his hand resting on his belt. "Don't get smart with me," he warned. "We're doing our job, and you're acting suspicious." Marcus took a deep breath, keeping his voice steady. "I respect the work you do, but I expect the same respect in return." The tension grew as more passersby slowed to watch. Marcus could feel the officers' irritation mounting, but he remained calm. Little did they know, the man they were questioning was not just any passerby. He was Judge Marcus Hayes, and this encounter was about to take a turn they never expected. Officer Grant's patience was wearing thin, and it showed in his tone. "Listen, just answer the questions and stop acting like you own the place," he said sharply. His partner, Officer Davis, stood slightly behind him, looking uneasy but unwilling to step in. Marcus, still calm, adjusted his posture and kept his hands visible. "Officers, I've given you my ID and told you why I'm here. I don't see why this needs to go any further," he replied. His voice was steady, but there was a firmness in his tone that suggested he wouldn't back down. The growing tension in the air attracted more attention. A small group of bystanders had stopped to watch, whispering among themselves. A young woman with her phone held up began recording, sensing that the interaction was turning into something more serious. Grant stepped even closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Why don't you just stop talking and cooperate?" he said, his voice rising. "People like you think you can do whatever you want." Marcus frowned but stayed composed. "People like me?" he asked, his voice calm but pointed. "What exactly do you mean by that, officer?" Grant seemed taken aback for a moment, but he quickly recovered, his frustration boiling over. Don't twist my words, he snapped. Just answer the questions, or I'll have to take further action. Davis finally spoke up, his tone quieter. Grant, maybe we should just let him go. He hasn't done anything. Grant shot him a glare. Stay out of it, Davis. I've got this under control. Marcus, now realizing the situation was escalating unnecessarily, decided it was time to reveal who he was. He reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a badge, holding it up for both officers to see. I think you've misunderstood something, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm Judge Marcus Hayes. The crowd let out a collective gasp, and even Officer Davis looked stunned. Grant froze, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the badge. For a moment, he seemed unsure of what to do, but then his expression hardened. Anyone can carry a fake badge, he said dismissively. You expect me to believe you're a judge? Marcus raised an eyebrow, unbothered by the accusation. Call your precinct and ask for confirmation, he said simply. I'll wait. Grant hesitated, his confidence visibly shaken. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and more phones were raised to capture the moment. Davis looked at Grant, clearly uncomfortable. Grant, maybe we should. Enough. Grant snapped. He turned back to Marcus, but before he could say another word, a voice called out from the crowd. That's really Judge Hayes, the young woman recording said. I've seen him on the news. You're making the huge mistake. Grant's face turned pale as the realization began to sink in. Marcus stood tall, his calm demeanor unshaken. Now, officer, he said quietly, would you like to continue this conversation, or shall we end it here? Grant's bravado faded, and for the first time, he looked unsure of himself. Davis stepped forward, his voice steady but softer. Judge Hayes, we apologize for the misunderstanding. We'll let you go. Marcus didn't move. He looked at both officers, his expression serious. This isn't over, he said firmly. Actions have consequences, and I intend to ensure accountability. The video of the encounter spread quickly. By the next morning, it was all over social media, with headlines calling attention to the actions of the officers and the calm, composed reaction of Judge Marcus Hayes. The footage sparked heated conversations about bias, accountability, and the misuse of authority. At his home, Marcus sat at the breakfast table with his wife, Elaine, reading the comments on the video. Look at this, Elaine said, pointing to one of the posts. This judge handled it with grace. We need more leaders like him. People are really paying attention. Marcus set down his coffee, his expression thoughtful. It's not about me, he said. This could have happened to anyone. I just happen to have the authority to push back. But not everyone has that privilege. Elaine nodded. You have a chance to do something about it, she said. Use this moment to make a change. Later that day, Marcus received a call from the police chief, Chief Bradley. His tone was measured but concerned. Judge Hayes, I want to personally apologize for the incident. The chief began. This isn't the kind of behavior we stand for in our department. Marcus appreciated the apology, but he wasn't interested in empty words. Chief Bradley, thank you for reaching out, he replied. But this is bigger than an apology. This is about ensuring that no one else has to face a situation like this, whether they're a judge or an ordinary citizen. The chief agreed to meet with Marcus that afternoon to discuss the matter further. When Marcus arrived at the precinct, he was greeted with a mix of curiosity and unease from the officers present. He could feel the tension in the air, but remained focused on the task at hand. In the chief's office, Marcus laid out his concerns. What happened to me was a clear example of profiling and a lack of proper training, he said firmly. This isn't just about those two officers. It's about the culture that allows these behaviors to continue unchecked. Chief Bradley nodded, taking notes as Marcus spoke. I agree, he said. We've been planning to implement new training programs, but clearly we need to act faster. I'd like your input on how we can address these issues effectively. Marcus was impressed by the chief's willingness to listen. Together, they discussed plans to improve officer training, focusing on de-escalation tactics, bias awareness, and community engagement. The chief also promised a thorough investigation into the actions of Officers Grant and Davis. As Marcus left the precinct, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. This was just the beginning, but it was a step in the right direction. Outside, a small group of reporters had gathered, eager for a statement. Marcus faced the cameras with his usual calm demeanor. "What happened to me is part of a larger issue," he said. "But I believe that through accountability and meaningful reform, we can create a system that truly serves and protects everyone." The reporters bombarded him with questions, but Marcus kept his answers focused and measured. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was determined to use this moment to advocate for real change. As he walked away, the reporters' questions faded into the background, replaced by his resolve to turn this incident into an opportunity for progress. The day after his meeting with the police chief, Judge Marcus Hayes received an overwhelming number of messages. Some were from concerned citizens thanking him for his courage, while others shared their own experiences with similar encounters. Marcus read each one carefully, his determination to make a change growing stronger with every story. In the courthouse, his colleagues approached him with words of support. "Marcus, you handled that situation with so much grace," said Judge Linda Carter, one of his closest allies. "But what's next? How do you plan to keep the momentum going?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I'm meeting with community leaders and local organizations this week," he replied. "It's not just about fixing one department. It's about addressing the root of the problem, how we approach policing and community trust." By midweek, Marcus found himself at a packed town hall meeting. The room buzzed with energy as residents, activists, and even off-duty officers gathered to discuss the incident and its broader implications. Marcus stood at the front, his calm presence commanding attention as he began to speak. "What happened to me was unacceptable," he said, his voice steady. "But I had the privilege of knowing how to stand my ground. Many others in our community don't have that advantage, and that's why we're here tonight, to ensure that everyone is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus continued. "This isn't about blaming every officer. Many of them are good people doing their best in difficult jobs. But we need to ensure they have the training and resources to serve the community fairly and effectively." One by one, community members shared their concerns. A mother spoke about her teenage son being stopped repeatedly for no reason. An elderly man described how he no longer felt safe walking in his own neighborhood. The stories were heartbreaking, but Marcus listened intently, taking notes and offering words of encouragement. When it was the officer's turn to speak, one young officer stood up hesitantly. "I want to thank Judge Hayes for handling this situation the way he did," she said. "It's made me reflect on how I approach my job. I want to do better, and I hope the new training programs will help me do that." The room fell silent, and then a wave of applause filled the air. Marcus nodded, his respect for the officer evident. "It takes courage to admit we can do better," he said. "And that's the first step toward real change." As the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope. The community wasn't just voicing frustrations, they were coming together to find solutions. He left the town hall that night with a long list of action items and a heart full of determination. Back at home, Elaine greeted him with a warm smile. "How did it go?" she asked. Marcus sighed, but it was a sigh of relief. "Better than I could have hoped," he said. "People are ready for change. Now it's up to us to make it happen." As he prepared for bed, Marcus couldn't help but think about the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but he was confident they were moving in the right direction. Together, they could build a better, safer, and more just community for everyone. The following week, the police department began implementing the new reforms. It was a direct result of Judge Marcus Hayes' insistence and collaboration with Chief Bradley. The first step was mandatory training for all officers, focusing on de-escalation techniques, bias awareness, and community relations. Marcus was invited to attend the first session, and he gladly accepted. The training room was filled with officers, some visibly curious. others appearing skeptical. At the front of the room stood a facilitator, a retired officer turned community advocate. The session began with a simple yet powerful question. What does it mean to truly serve and protect? The facilitator guided the officers through scenarios, some of which mirrored what had happened with Marcus. One exercise required officers to practice de-escalating a situation without raising their voices or using force. Another asked them to reflect on their biases and how those biases might impact their decisions. As Marcus watched, he noticed a shift in some of the officers. The younger ones, in particular, seemed eager to learn, asking thoughtful questions and engaging in discussions. Officer Davis, who had been present during Marcus's park encounter, approached him during a break. "Judge Hayes," Davis began, his tone earnest, "I want to apologize again for what happened that night. I should have spoken up sooner, but I didn't know how." Marcus looked at him, his expression kind. "It's not easy to speak up in those moments," he said, "but the fact that you're here, willing to learn and do better, says a lot. Keep moving in the right direction." The training continued throughout the day, and by the end, even the most skeptical officers admitted they had gained valuable insights. Chief Bradley thanked Marcus for attending, his respect for the judge evident. "Your presence here made a big impact," he said. "It shows the officers that this isn't just about rules. It's about real people and real lives." Meanwhile, the community noticed the changes as well. Officers began attending neighborhood meetings, not to patrol, but to listen. They helped organize events, played basketball with local kids, and participated in cleanup projects. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. One afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his office. It was Officer Jenkins, one of the officers who had initially been skeptical of the reforms. "Judge Hayes," Jenkins began, "I wanted to thank you. At first, I thought all this training was just for show, but last week, I was able to de-escalate a situation without anyone getting hurt. The training worked, and it felt good to handle it the right way." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with hope. "That's why we're doing this," he said, "to make sure every encounter ends peacefully, and every person feels respected." As Jenkins left, Marcus leaned back in his chair, reflecting on how far they had come. The changes weren't perfect, and there was still work to do, but progress was being made. Marcus knew that change didn't happen overnight, but it was moments like these that proved it was possible. At home that evening, Marcus shared the story with Elaine and their 2 children. "You're making a difference, Dad," his older son said, his admiration clear. Marcus smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They were building something better, together. Weeks turned into months, and the changes within the police department became more visible. Officers were now attending monthly community forums where residents could openly share their concerns and experiences. These meetings were a safe space for dialogue, and Judge Marcus Hayes often joined to ensure the conversation stayed constructive. The once tense relationship between the community and the police was beginning to thaw. At one such meeting, a single mother named Carla stood up to speak. "I'll be honest," she began, her voice wavering. "I used to avoid calling the police for anything. I didn't trust them. But last week, when my car broke down late at night, an officer stopped to help me. He didn't ask unnecessary questions or make me feel uncomfortable. He just helped, and it meant a lot." The room erupted in applause. Marcus noticed Officer Jenkins sitting in the corner, looking slightly embarrassed, but also proud. Carla continued, "If we can see more moments like that, maybe we'll all feel safer." Marcus stood to address the group. "That's exactly the kind of change we're working toward," he said. "It's not about fixing everything overnight. It's about taking small, meaningful steps every day to rebuild trust." The positive momentum wasn't without challenges, though. Some officers still resisted the changes, arguing that the new protocols slowed them down in high-pressure situations. Others feared backlash from their peers if they openly supported the reforms. Chief Bradley and Marcus worked closely to address these concerns, hosting closed-door sessions where officers could voice their frustrations without judgment. During one of these sessions, Officer Grant, the officer who had confronted Marcus at the park, surprised everyone by speaking up. "I'll admit, I was angry when all this started," Grant said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "I felt like I was being blamed for things I didn't do. But after going through the training and seeing how it's helped me in the field, I can't deny it works. I'm learning to see things differently, and I want to be better." His words carried weight, especially coming from someone who had initially resisted the reforms. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, sensing a genuine shift in Grant's attitude. "Change isn't easy," Marcus said, addressing the room. "But it's necessary, and it takes courage to admit when we need to grow." Meanwhile, the changes were gaining attention beyond the city. News outlets began reporting on the department's progress, highlighting it as a potential model for other cities struggling with similar issues. Marcus was invited to speak at several conferences, sharing his experiences and the steps the city had taken to foster trust between the police and the community. At home, Elaine watched one of his interviews with a proud smile. "You've started something real, Marcus," she said as he walked into the room. "People are noticing, and it's making a difference." Marcus sat down beside her, his heart full. "It's not just me," he said. "It's the community, the officers willing to change, and everyone who believes we can do better." As they sat together, Marcus thought about the long journey ahead. There would still be obstacles, but for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. Together, they were proving that progress was possible when people worked hand in hand toward a common goal. The progress in the community was undeniable. Police officers and residents were engaging with each other in ways that felt genuine, and trust was slowly being rebuilt. The monthly forums were now a regular event, with officers attending not out of obligation, but out of a desire to listen and learn. The atmosphere of these gatherings had shifted from tension to collaboration. One evening, Marcus sat at a community forum where a young man named Eric, who had once been openly critical of the police, stood up to speak. "A year ago, I wouldn't have believed this kind of change was possible," Eric admitted. "But I see officers in my neighborhood now, not just driving by, but stopping to talk to us, playing basketball with the kids, and actually listening to what we have to say. That's a big deal." The room erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a swell of pride. Moments like this made all the hard work worthwhile. Eric continued, "I'm not saying everything's perfect, but it feels like we're finally moving in the right direction." Officer Jenkins, who had grown into a leader within the department, stood next. "I want to thank the community for being patient with us," he said. "Change isn't easy, but it's been inspiring to see how many of you are willing to work with us. We still have a lot to learn, but we're committed to doing better." After the forum, Marcus stayed behind to chat with some of the attendees. Carla, the single mother who had spoken at a previous meeting, approached him with a smile. "Judge Hayes," she said, "thank you for everything you've done. You've shown us that one person really can make a difference." Marcus shook her hand, humbled by her words. "It's not just me," he replied. "It's all of us, working together." Meanwhile, Chief Bradley was working behind the scenes to ensure the changes were sustainable. He introduced policies that rewarded officers for community engagement and created a mentoring program for younger recruits. Officers like Jenkins and even Grant, who had once resisted change, became mentors, guiding new recruits on how to approach their roles with empathy and fairness. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from a neighboring city. The police chief there wanted to implement similar reforms and asked if Marcus would be willing to share his insights. Marcus readily agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to spread the positive changes beyond his own community. That evening, Marcus sat with his family at the dinner table, reflecting on how far they had come. Ava, his youngest daughter, looked up at him and said, "Daddy, are people being nicer now?" Marcus smiled, his heart full. "They are, sweetheart," he said, "and we're all working to make sure it stays that way." Elaine reached for his hand, her voice soft but filled with pride. "You've done something amazing, Marcus. You've brought people together." As the evening turned to night, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey wasn't over, but they were proving that real change was possible. One step, one conversation, and one act of kindness at a time. Months later, the impact of Judge Marcus Hayes's efforts could be seen throughout the community. The reforms he had pushed for were no longer just ideas on paper. They were a part of everyday life. The streets felt safer, not because of an increased police presence, but because officers and residents had built mutual respect. Trust, once shattered, was slowly being rebuilt piece by piece. One morning, Marcus received an invitation to a citywide event celebrating the progress the community had made. The event was set to include speeches, performances, and even a dedication ceremony for a new community center. The center, funded by donations and city grants, was designed as a space for dialogue, learning, and connection, a tangible symbol of the unity they had worked so hard to achieve. As Marcus arrived at the event with his family, he was greeted by familiar faces from the forums, officers he had come to know, and community members who now saw him as more than just a judge. Ava held his hand tightly, beaming with pride as she looked around at the bustling crowd. The ceremony began with speeches from community leaders, including Chief Bradley. "This past year has taught us the importance of listening, learning, and growing together," the chief said. "None of this would have been possible without the leadership of Judge Marcus Hayes. His dedication to justice and his belief in the power of community have inspired us all." The crowd erupted in applause as Marcus stepped up to the podium. He looked out at the sea of faces, people who had worked alongside him, supported him, and challenged him to be better. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This isn't about me. It's about us. It's about what we can accomplish when we come together, even in the face of difficulty." He paused, letting his words sink in. "A year ago, I experienced something that could have left me angry and bitter, but instead, it became a chance for reflection and growth. For me, for the police department, and for our community. This center is a reminder of what we've built together, and it's a symbol of the work that still lies ahead." The crowd cheered, and Marcus felt a wave of gratitude. He continued, "Let's remember that change isn't something we achieve and then forget. It's something we nurture every day through our actions, our words, and our choices." After his speech, Marcus joined his family and friends in the crowd. Ava tugged at his sleeve and asked, "Daddy, can we visit the center soon?" Marcus knelt down to her level, smiling. "Of course, sweetheart. This place is for everyone." As the event continued, Marcus reflected on the journey they had taken. It hadn't been easy, and there was still much to do, but they had proven that progress was possible. Together, they had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change, creating a stronger, more united community, one that he was proud to call home.